Tom Vartabedian. Now, I hope I don't have to say his name more than 5 times, but I've been practicing all week. Tom Vartabedian worked as a local newspaper reporter for 50 years. Imagine that. Over the course of his career, he wrote thousands of obituaries. In the May of last year, he wrote one about himself. He ventured out and wrote his own obituary. Imagine that. You're going to see a picture of him, at least I hope you will. That's him. He wrote that in May of last year. Now, obituary, if you don't know, it means report of death. And it goes a step further than just the bare facts. So today, we're going to learn how we might be able to write our own. The Wall Street Journal interviewed him, and they said, "I have written probably the most important story in my life." Imagine that. So what should be included? They asked him, when you're thinking about writing an obituary, what do you include? And he says, well, how about bowling trophies or polka club or missionary trips or work as a voting clerk? And he says, I don't leave anything to chance. The 75-year-old columnist who had written all those years for the Haverhill, Massachusetts paper, recently even taught a senior adult class on writing your own obituary. Now imagine that. Looking back, he says, the obituaries need to have something of the essence of every person, the very essence of them. He says, if somebody was kind to animals and rescued stray cats from the Merrimack River, he said, I would use that as the lead for that person's obituary. It was an 875-word obituary that Vartabedian wrote for himself, and it was in that he talked about something that was a little odd at the time, but it was very real, and that was he talked about having fought the courageous battle that he had been fighting for quite a while now with stage 4 gastrointestinal cancer. And so what he wrote was he had been courageous during that. But really, he says, I'm not afraid to die. I'm just curious about what's on the other side, and I hope I end up in the right place. He wrote that in May, and he died in November of last year. The 4 things that the local paper wrote about him was family, church, heritage, and Haverhill, which was the paper that he wrote for. So what is your story? What is your story? If we were going to write your story this morning, what would it be? We've had a myriad of experiences already in the service that would in some way help us relate to our own stories. But Paul, in Romans, now Romans 13 is an odd chapter in that you almost always, if you've ever read Romans, you almost always remember Romans 13 like you would remember 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13 is the love chapter, and this one is the one that deals with a little bit of politics. But if you get past about verse 6, you get into 7 and 8, and that's where we're going to land. This is how it goes. Verse 8 of chapter 13, and it's not going to be on the screen. Let no debt remain outstanding except for the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. And then he talks about some commandments. The commandments say, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And whatever other command there is are all summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does not harm a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. And do this, understanding the present time, the hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. He says, the night is nearly over, the day is almost here, so let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. And let us behave decently, as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness, nor in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. Rather, clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. So here it is. We have landed yet again on Paul's theme of love. Even after talking about the emperors and kingdoms and how you should be appropriately connected to obeying those you should obey, he gives this entourage of things that remind us of how it is that we are to love. And so in addition, when walking in love, you rejoice over those who are joyful, and sometimes you weep with those who are mourning. And so Paul characterizes in this verse his love that is so sincere and so pure that I think it challenges all of us. It challenges all of us because it displays toward our enemies a kindness. It manifests a blessing that we can offer others in feeding and giving them something even to drink. And so, looking in context, these first 6, 7 verses, he talks about being committed and to governing authorities, but he quickly starts talking about the indebtedness that we have, not simply to these authorities, but the indebtedness that we have to others. He says, yes, there's an indebtedness in taxes and revenue and reverence and honor and all those things. He says, but most of all, love is owed to all people despite their position. So yes, you have reverence and honor for those that are in high authorities, but at the end of the day, we are indebted to all people because we are to be love. Tom Bartabedian knew that his time on earth was short, and so he got busy writing his own obituary because of that stage 4 cancer. Paul tells us that salvation is nearer to us now than when we became believers. In other words, live your lives in such a way that you will not challenge the preacher to lie on the day of your funeral. That's it in a nutshell. Not that I'm going to, but there are moments when I stand up and I recognize that there is something about this time that limits me. Last 2 funerals I've done, let me give you a scenario. Young man, 27 years old, was the 6-week custodian at this church who was coming home, not driving, but was with somebody he probably shouldn't have been with who was driving, and he never made it home. Friday, a lady that many of you grew up with if you were in this church in the 70s, her name was Flora Nell Long. Nell passed away. Basically, she had fallen and broken yet another bone in her body. She's been in Florida for the last 10, 12 years. And she wanted to come back to the place where she had experienced a great deal of joy and a great deal of sorrow, the chapel. But it was there that she had exactly, well, matter of fact, it was this collar. I don't know if you noticed, but Cassandra sent me the color of the day, and this was the tie that I had to choose because it matched it. No, she didn't do that. I'm just kidding. We just happened to match. But she was in this beautiful outfit, and she had been the Order of the Eastern Star, and she had her little badge there. And I talked with her family, and they said that she literally pulled off the breathing mask because she said, I am ready to go and be with the Lord. When I talked to the funeral home and the family, they had told me that those clothes had been picked out literally for years, and that little name tag was positioned just there. There were no lies that took place on Friday, I can assure you. So what then are you and I going to do to write our own obituary? Let me go just 3 or 4 points. Making good choices is key. Paul makes a distinction between the works of darkness and putting on the armor of light. And you and I have to make choices. Every day we have to make choices. And at the end of the day, we feel good about those, or we walk around with a pit in our stomach about those choices. I do, at least. Those on the trail of this hurricane experience, the choices they will make before the hurricane comes and the choices they will make after the hurricane comes, all of those will in fact make a difference. So let me ask you, how did your week of choices go this week? So what then are you doing today to write your own obituary? Secondly, loving your neighbor as yourself. Let me tell you about a simple man. His name was Eddie Allen. He was born in South Carolina and the youngest of 7 children. Literally, you can look it up. I just went to simple people and simple places and found their stories. After completing high school, He migrated to Connecticut, and there he worked for many years in a local factory. He married a lady by the name of Beverly, and together they raised 4 daughters, 11 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Eddie's resume was ordinary, but his obituary was extraordinary. Let me read sections of it for you. The motto he lived was, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Eddie would do almost anything he could to help another. No task too big or small to lend a helping hand. He was known as the fish man. He had a passion for deep-sea fishing and frying fish, and one of his greatest loves was to provide a hot batch of fried fish for any occasion. And so at his Baptist church, he was a cooking team member that served at all the church events. The obituary read, "Eddie led a successful life because he loved everyone." At the end of the day, we gain nothing when we choose to limit our love for others. We gain absolutely nothing. Next, what then are we going to do to write our obituary? Well, lay aside any work of darkness. Now, how many of us reflect back on our lives, and there was a moment in time when we had to turn away from a layer of darkness that simply was awful, and it was strangling us. It was holding us. There's a group of people that meet in our church every week, a couple times. They're with Alcoholics Anonymous, and those folks have story after story. I found one of those stories. Catherine Thompson spent most of her 93 years in Oregon, where she was very close to all of her friends and family, but for more than 50 years, she was active in a YWCA group that met for potlucks, card games, camping trips, and performing philanthropic deeds. And her obituary describes her an extraordinary mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. But what really tells the story about her life was that Catherine was proud of her 39 years of sobriety. She was a mentor for many men and women, with the story that she had turned her life around and it was never to be the same. You see, there came a point in her life when she had to move aside the shadow of darkness from her life and choose the light that was there. Next, what then are you going to do to write your own obituary? Putting on the Lord Jesus Christ. I can't tell you anything more important than that today. He says it in verse 14, put on, literally, put on the Lord Jesus Christ. I thought here of a person that I could give an example of that really would just shake us from our roots, because the hope for all of us is that we have put on Christ. But let me give you an example of a man who put on Christ in a most unusual way. His name is Henry Nouwen. You see Henry there with a young man by the name of Adam. Let me tell you a little bit about the book that he wrote later and that whole story. Adam, let me give you a reference. Henry Nouwen, the man on the left there, was a very famous man who lived and talked and wrote books about his faith. He taught at teeny tiny colleges of no importance like Harvard and Yale and different places. I actually even taught it at Notre Dame as well. And there he taught all those years until finally he said he felt called, he felt moved to go and help Adam. Now let me tell you Adam's story. Adam is seriously disabled. In the last 10 years of Adam's life, Henry Nouwen lived with him. He got him up in the mornings, he bathed him, he shaved him, he brushed his teeth, he combed his hair, and he helped him as he tried to eat. You might think that this would be a big sacrifice for Nouwen, but if you talk to him about it, he would find out that he, in fact, thought he was the one that was receiving the blessing of God. And so for those 10 years, he cared for him and did all the manual labor needed. Philip Yancey, one of the more famous writers, wrote an article about that relationship, and he says, "It is not Adam who gets the main benefit from our friendship," he quoted from now on. Now, I've got to tell you, that's putting on Christ. So how are you and I going to do this? Yancey wrote of Nouwen, he had learned to love Adam, truly to love him, and in the process, he had learned what it must be like for God, in fact, to love us. Spiritually uncoordinated, able to respond with what we must seem to God like inarticulate grunts and groans. And so even as he dealt with Adam and all of his issues, he looks fairly normal there. I can tell you he's not. I could show you many, many pictures where he looks anything but that. And there it was that he continued to care for him until the very end. Let me take you one final place. It's a place in South Korea. Daegu is the name of it. I think that's how it's pronounced. And if you go there on a certain night, at least the story has it, a person entered in, and there they found laid out in the candle-lit, windowless room were rows of sealed coffins, stretched from wall to wall. A dark figure bends down and opens one of them, and sure enough, somebody comes out of there. It is a 56-year-old food factory employee by the name of Kim Akran. He sets up and dries his tears, collects his own death certificate, and rushes out home because his grandson is waiting to be fed. Now, I know what you're thinking. I was thinking the same thing. This is what is called living funeral therapy. It's going on every day in a place where there are the highest level of suicides than anywhere in the world. Did you know that? I think I would understand that being next to North Korea if I lived there. But here you find companies now that are taking this upon themselves to prepare their people to live their lives. That's right. You literally come to this place, you bring pictures, you make decisions, you look around the room and you see all these pictures of people, dead celebrities, and you have music that you choose, and there you make the decision to which coffin you want to be put in, and there they put you in a coffin, and they hit each corner of the coffin to let it feel like this really is the end. And they leave you on a certain amount of time. They leave you in there. Now, if you think that's not serious, let me tell you what is serious. You've heard of companies like Samsung and Hyundai. Well, they are doing this regularly for all of their employees. Samsung has taken it so seriously that they now built a wing on their facility there to do just this thing with all their employees. I remember one time bringing there was a funeral home director in the church, and we brought in a casket, and we put the casket in front of the church, and we had everybody come by. I might do this sometime. And when you come by, you look inside, and there is a mirror. And you are asked to reevaluate what it means to experience what we saw this morning in the burial, the life, the death, and the burial and the resurrection of Christ. One of the ladies that participated in one of these says, "I feel like I have been reborn. I want to go call my husband and tell him thank you and sorry." Now, I read that and had all kinds of thoughts about maybe asking Neva to go and have an experience like this, but I'm not crazy. But I did think about the two words that she thought about. And I will tell you that I think any of us who face life with the starkness of death on ourselves recognize the power of sorry and thank you.